having done a little bit on Saudi Arabia and Iraq, I want to talk a bit about South America. Because I think today, what's going on in South America is amazingly significant. Viva los latinos y las latinas. Viva. 7 countries in South America representing over 80% of the population of South America, 300 million out of 360 million people in the last elections voted in the president who ran specifically on an anti-corporatocracy campaign. Now, I want to tell you that these people are not anti-American. I speak Spanish fluently. I spend a lot of time in Latin America, all the time. I have 3 godchildren who live in Latin America. I was there as a Peace Corps volunteer in the late 60s. And I can tell you that any one of you goes to any one of these 7 countries and the people there will welcome you with open arms. And they love what this country represents, despite what our president says about people hating democracy. I don't know anybody that does. They love our Declaration of Independence. They love our ideals. They hate having our corporations exploit their resources. They can't stand that. What Bolivia wants is not cocaine. That's an absurdity. What Bolivia wants is to have its natural gas be used, the revenues from its natural gas be used to help pull its poorest people up by their bootstraps. What Ecuador wants is for its oil to be used to help its poor people. That's what Venezuela wants. And Brazil wants to have its Amazon rainforest used to help its people and all of its other resources, and the same for Chile and Uruguay. All of these countries, what they are objecting to is the corporatocracy. It isn't you and me. It isn't the American way. They love this, but they can't stand to have their resources exploited by us. They're not asking us to help them. They're not asking for foreign aid. In fact, you know, Chavez just helped Bolivia pay off all of its debts to the IMF. It's nice to be with enthusiastic people. So they've sent us a very, very strong message, an incredibly strong message. I am so taken by what's going on in South America today, these democratic movements. And isn't it interesting that in our own country, in the United States of America, in recent history, the only people that have really organized and taken to the streets and protested have been the Latinos. They understand democracy. But I want to tell you what happens to these presidents in South America. And I can tell you this as a fact because after Confessions of an Economic Hit Man was written, a lot of people came out of the shadows, other economic hitmen and jackals and others, and talked to me and told me their stories. And their stories are going in the book I'm working on now, as well as they're pretty amazing. I kind of like some of my stories, but wait till you read theirs. Puts me to shame. And I talked to a couple of them who've done what I'm going to describe for you right now in the last few years. Every one of these presidents, when he's taken office, or she in the case of Chile, when he or she has taken office, someone like me, someone with my old job, economic hitman, walks into that office. And this is someone the president knows, seen around, maybe works for the World Bank or a private consulting firm. He's been around, he speaks Spanish, or she maybe. And that person walks into the president's office and says, "Mr. President," or Ms. President in the case of Bachelet of Chile, "so the president walks in and says, the economic hitman walks in and says, "Congratulations, Mr. President. And now, I just want to remind you that," and he speaks in a pretty soft voice at this point, "I just want to remind you that in this pocket over here, I got a couple of $100 million for you and your family. Couple of $100 million if you play the game our way. And in this pocket, I got a gun with a bullet. It's got your name on it, in case you decide to keep your campaign promises." Every one of these presidents has had that experience. Chavez has been writing about it and speaking about it. He's read my book and invited me down there, and he's got some amazing speeches where he talks about the economic hitmen and the jackals that have come to him. In the case of Ecuador, Gutierrez was elected president. He ran on a very strong anti-oil campaign, anti-corporatocracy campaign, and the people, and I know Ecuador really well, that's where my godchildren are. And I was there at the time, and he won with a pretty good majority on this anti-corporatocracy platform. He was visited by one of these men, I know who, and within a month he was in Washington, D.C., and when he came back, people were plastering pictures up all over the walls of Quito and Guayaquil with pictures of Gutierrez holding hands with George Bush. George likes to hold hands with a lot of men. Have you noticed that? And he began to cut real sweet deals with the oil companies. And he began to implement the conditionalities that the IMF and the World Bank wanted him to pose upon his people. The people took to the streets. They were infuriated. They had elected this guy, and he's gone against his campaign promises, and they kicked him out. He had to flee to Brazil. Now, my phone was ringing off the hook that day. My Ecuadorian friends were calling me and saying, "You know, in a democratic country like Ecuador, when you vote a man in who runs on a certain campaign platform, and he doesn't keep it, he goes against everything he ran on, democracy demands that you throw him out of office." Why don't you guys do the same thing? I don't know, I said, maybe we're not a democracy. So, all over South America, this is what's going on now, and we're seeing the repercussions in many countries, actually. And what I want to say to you is, put yourself in the position of that president. Imagine if you had run on a campaign that you deeply believe in, of keeping down the corporatocracy, of using your country's resources to help your people, and you're voted in, and somebody walks into your office and says something like that to you. Now, that's usually said more subtly. It's not quite as dramatic as I put it, but because I've said that to people like that. And what we really say at that point is, hey, remember what happened to Arbenz of Guatemala? Remember what happened to Allende of Chile? Remember what happened to Roldos? Remember what happened to Lumumba in the Congo? Remember what happened to Diem in Vietnam? Remember what happened to Torrijos? Remember what happened to Noriega? Remember, remember, remember. They get the message. What would you do if you'd just been elected president of one of these countries and someone like me walks into your office and gives you this ultimatum? Here's a lot of money for you and your family, or we can throw you out of office. And you know damn well that if you get thrown out of office or assassinated, the next guy is going to be scared shitless. What's he going to do? So what are you going to do when that happens? What would you do? It's a hard question to answer, isn't it?